All right, well, welcome, folks. I'd like to welcome everyone to another exciting webinar co-hosted by the Ontario Charitable Gaming Association and the Canadian Postcode Lottery Foundation. We had over 200 registrants for this webinar today. And just a note, we are recording the webinar, so if you do want to rewatch it or share it, it will be available later online, and we'll make sure we get those links out to you as soon as we can. As we all know, volunteers are the lifeblood of charities. In today's environment, there's an increased need for services by charities and more resources needed by our organizations in a time when resources are really hard to find. So there's a risk to our dedicated volunteer base. And I know I'm very keen to hear from our guests today on managing, maintaining, and supporting this precious resource. I'd like to give a special thank you to our distinguished guests from Volunteer Canada and Red Cross Amsterdam, and I'm going to pass it over to Judith to explain a little bit more about the Postcode Lottery.
Thank you so much, Richard, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many of you joining us for another session in our webinar series, because this is already the fourth event that we have been producing together with the OCGA. Previously, we tackled topics like fundraising challenges, the pros and cons of artificial intelligence, and today we are focusing again on something truly vital: volunteers. And as Richard say, very important for the whole landscape. And we would like to talk about how to keep volunteers happy, healthy, and engaged. So a special thank you again to Volunteer Canada for partnering with us. This is the second webinar we are producing together. And it is also a quite timely planning because it's National Volunteer Week this week. But before we dive into today's program, I'd also like to quickly introduce the Canadian Postcode Lottery Foundation. Some of you might have joined already previous sessions with us and know a little already, but for those who are new to the crowd, the Canadian Postcode Lottery Foundation is part of the Postcode Lottery Group, and we're based in Europe. I'm here in Amsterdam office, although I have sort of like Canadian it a little bit. So I hope you like my flags and my background. But the Postcode Lottery Group is actually a social enterprise, and we were founded here in the Netherlands in 1989. And currently, we're running 6 charity lotteries in 5 different countries. And the whole idea is to raise as many funds as possible for charities. And last year, to give some perspective, 2024 alone, we've been able to raise an incredible amount of $1 billion for charity organizations and thousands of community initiatives. All thanks to those millions and millions of households who play our lottery month after month. It's a subscription-based lottery, and we're very pleased with so many people who continue playing with us. So this unique format encourages neighbors to play and win together, because the idea is your postal code is actually part of your lottery ticket number. So that's how it works, and that also makes, when the notary draws, people winning together who live close to each other. A community lottery, as we say. And we're very excited to bring this model to Ontario very soon. And thanks to the support of our partners like the OCGA and also you at home watching, the incredible charitable community of Ontario, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario has found us as an organization eligible. Important step. So we are, as we speak, working very hard to get things from the ground. And we have already received, for the years that we've been existing, many messages from organizations like yours that could use some extra funding. But please bear with us. First, we need to build a strong foundation of lottery players in Ontario before we can start awarding grants. And based on our expertise and experience in other countries, we know this is absolutely achievable, but it will take some time. So I would say keep an eye on your mailbox towards the end of the year. And in the meantime, we will, as Canadian Postcode Lottery Foundation, continue to focus on strengthening the charitable sector, just as we do in the Netherlands, in Sweden, Great Britain, Germany, and Norway, through initiatives like today's educational sessions. And that brings me back to the topic of this morning: volunteers. Volunteers, they are truly the backbone of the charitable sector. I probably don't have to tell you who are watching. They make it possible to reach more people, to have a bigger impact, and to strengthen our communities. And therefore, I'm very proud to introduce the first of our two wonderful speakers of this morning. First up is Ester Forcolin, volunteer coordinator at the Netherlands Red Cross in Amsterdam. And the Red Cross organizations, they have been a long-term partner of our Postcode lotteries for decades already. So we know them very, very well. And they rely on a huge network of volunteers. So with Ester in our midst, we have a true expert on board and someone with a special connection to Canada. But she will tell you herself. Ester, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Judith. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Ester Forcolin, and I'd like to give you a short introduction of who I am and what I'm doing. And I want to go back a little bit into history, so you also know what the connection for me is with Canada. Because someday I fell in love with someone, and I heard him speak, and I thought, like, oh my goodness, it's probably some Canadian guy living far away. We're heading towards a long-distance relationship, which I hated. But it turns out he actually was Italian. He still is. But he was living in Europe, so the distance was not so bad. Soon we started dating, and we started visiting Canada, and we kept doing that for the last 20 years. So the GTA has become kind of my second home. So that's how I got to know Canada a little bit. And together with our 14-year-old daughter, we're living near Amsterdam. And 16 years ago, I started taking a first aid course. And then I decided, like, I'm going to make it used to that. And I signed up with the Red Cross with a simple goal, just helping people. I became a first aid volunteer as well as a team leader for our emergency support services. When the war in the Ukraine started a few years ago, I also became a staff member, first managing our humanitarian service point in Amsterdam to manage accommodating the refugees after arriving and to be able to provide them a temporary and safe accommodation as quickly as possible somewhere in the country. All of this in cooperation with the local government. And currently, my focus lies on crisis management to ensure that our volunteers are well trained and prepared if they need to take action again to support the emergency services in the event of a new incident or crisis. This also includes the preparedness of our remote communication service, like I think it's translated to walkie-talkies, two-way radio, and our pages in order to be able to alert our volunteers. But most of all, my heart lies with volunteering, and I've kept doing that, especially for this beautiful organization as the Red Cross, because they always say, and that's what I tend to keep doing, when you see the Red Cross, you see help. So that's my short story.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ester, and we will see you back in a while. I love your passion, and I also love your personal story with that Canadian guy that you came across, and that you're now still happy with in Amsterdam. And I also know by experience we had King's Day, and it's a big festive day in the Netherlands last weekend, with thousands of people coming from all over the country into Amsterdam. And without the volunteers of the Red Cross, well, it would not have been so pleasant in the streets and at the canals. So thank you so much on behalf of myself. Back to the program, because it's now time to introduce the next speaker, Heather Montgomery, for the second time on our show, to say so, from Volunteer Canada. And Heather is the Vice President of Membership and Engagement within Volunteer Canada, with over 20 years of experience in nonprofit leadership, partnership building, and community engagement. So Heather will share her expertise now before entering into conversation again with Ester, and hopefully also a conversation with you watching, because the chat is open for your questions. So Heather, please take it away.
Thank you, Judith. And thank you for having Volunteer Canada and myself here today. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be in conversation with you, especially during National Volunteer Week. And we have a great topic, as Judith mentioned, around how do we keep our volunteers engaged and avoid burnout in these busy times. We thought we'd get started with a bit of a job for you, the audience. We want to get your ideas percolating in your own mind. And so we have a few questions that I think we have a Kahoot for. Is that somebody going to help? I think somebody's going to help me with the Kahoot. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to share my screen so everybody can see the pin we use, and then I'll wait a little bit so everybody gets in. So we have a few questions for everybody to answer. So please go to Kahoot on your phone or in the browser and enter this game pin, and then within a few seconds we will start the questions.
I like to start with some questions that kind of get us reflecting and thinking about our own sort of positions within our own organizations and kind of situates ourselves into this moment in this topic in a way that really helps, I hope, integrate what we're saying and your realities in ways that kind of help you consider how the ideas that are being shared today might be actually integrated into your own organizations and volunteer engagement efforts. What I'll do maybe is just give people a sense of the questions that you're about to encounter, so you can start ruminating over them as you wait for the questions to come up in the app. We're interested in learning from you how important volunteers are to your organization. Are they nice to have? Are they a way of engaging people but not critical? Or are they an absolute imperative to you being able to accomplish your mission? And the next question is around your stewardship practices and which ones are like most effective for you in keeping your volunteers engaged. And then the final question, and actually they may not come in this order, but then the third question is, at what stage in the volunteer cycle do your volunteers typically lose engagement? Where is it within that sort of spectrum of engagement that you find it most challenging to hold on to them? So those are the three questions that we're going to ask you to reflect on and think about. And we have some multiple choice answers for you to choose from. Yep. Just start thinking about that in your mind and reflecting on those questions as we wait for them to come up in Kahoot.
I will start the questions.
Wonderful. Interesting. Okay, so we're seeing that the majority of you find that your volunteers are absolutely crucial to your fundraising and service delivery efforts, and this is not surprising at all.
Let's go to the next question.
So now we're thinking about stewardship practices and how we're engaging volunteers in different ways that meet their needs and meet them where they're at. There are so many things that we do over the course of a year that are really put in place for us to continue the engagement with volunteers. And some of them are obvious and some of them are less than obvious. Oh, very interesting. So we have a couple of leaders here, one being regular personalized communication and check-ins and the other recognition and appreciation events. Excellent. Nice that we're seeing that ongoing communication as a really key stewardship practice. Thanks. Let's go to the next question. Now we're thinking about, when do people drop off? What stage in that cycle? Is there one that's more likely than others to lose people's engagement? Wow, yes, scheduling and engagement. And again, not surprising, right? We get people excited and, passionate about the work, and then it takes a while, right, to get them into the actual volunteer activity. And that can often be that time when we lose that engagement. So thank you, everyone, for participating in our Kahoot. And I hope that has got those creative juices flowing in your own minds about your own volunteer programs, how you're engaging folks, and where you might be able to apply some extra efforts to really increase that engagement and mitigate some of that burnout that we often see. And I want to talk a little bit about this year's National Volunteer Week theme, because I think it really aligns with this idea of volunteer engagement. The theme this year is Volunteers Make Waves. And it's really about highlighting the power, impact, and importance of volunteers' individual and collective efforts across Canada. And this is, of course, no surprise to all of you. You feel and breathe and see this every single day. Like a wave, volunteering is momentum building. Each individual volunteer contribution, big or small, creates momentum and has the power to influence and inspire, joining together to create a wave of positive change. Volunteer efforts ripple outward, strengthening communities with every powerful wave or quiet ripple of goodwill. And I think these themes are particularly fitting for our conversation today, because we want our volunteers to catch these waves, ride these waves, and be a part of that collective impact that's felt in communities from coast to coast to coast. And we're all very good at capturing the passion of the organizations that we represent and getting people excited about contributing to all the good work that's happening. But are we as good at providing the flotation devices that will allow our volunteers to really harness those waves and not be knocked down or pulled under by the current of activity that we're asking them to manage? And at this point in time, we know those currents are strong. Bear with me while I paint a picture of what's happening in our sector right now. The good news is that volunteering is part of Canada's social fabric. Pre-pandemic, almost 80% of Canadians aged 15 and up volunteered in some capacity, whether formally through a structured opportunity at an organization or informally as part of neighborhood or community mobilization efforts, direct person to person. That's about 24 million people giving their time to charitable organizations or directly in their community. In fact, in 2018, formal volunteers alone contributed 1.6 billion hours. That's equivalent to nearly 858,000 full-time jobs. Let's just take a moment to appreciate the magnitude of that. 858,000 full-time jobs. And that doesn't include the informal volunteering. Now, hopefully by the fall, we'll start to see the post-pandemic data from the 2023 General Social Survey on Giving and Volunteering. But in the meantime, we do have some telling data from 2022 and 2023 that shows some less than positive news. And again, this will be no surprise to those of you who are experiencing this on a day-to-day basis. Canada is now facing a significant volunteer shortage. Many older volunteers have stepped back due to health concerns, and younger volunteers haven't fully filled in those gaps. This has created a volunteer recruitment challenge across the country, and those volunteers that are already in our midst and already giving their time are starting to feel stretched thin. Post-pandemic, about 65% of nonprofits report a shortage of volunteers. At the same time, as 40% of charities are seeing significant increases in demand. So we've got this push me, pull you thing going on. And more than half of Canadian charities have fewer volunteers now than they did pre-pandemic. and are telling us that they're not able to meet the current levels of demands for their services. We're seeing this across the subsectors. We're seeing it in arts and culture. We're seeing it in social services. We're seeing it in sports and rec. As a result, a third of organizations have had to reduce their programs, and many have canceled services outright due to a lack of volunteers. And this is particularly challenging for the 58% of charities that have no paid staff. Furthermore, volunteer decline has contributed to a net loss of 357 charities in 2024. That's double the losses the previous year in 2023. This means critical community programs are being scaled back at a time when Canadians need them most. And the volunteer shortage is also causing an emerging human resource crisis in the sector. Organizations report staff and remaining volunteers are stretched so thin, with more than a quarter of organizations seeing paid employees working extra hours to backfill the gaps. Organizations across the country are grappling with staff and volunteer burnout and stress among their teams at significantly higher levels than we've seen in the recent past. And these trends are compounded by the fact that volunteer management staff were some of the first wave of employees to be laid off during the pandemic, and many organizations have not been able to bring these positions back. And yet we know from a recent Volunteer Toronto study that those organizations that do invest in volunteer management staff retain 16 times more volunteers. On top of all of this, Canada is also experiencing a crisis of social disconnection. Only about 20% of Canadians report a strong sense of community belonging. And older adults who were most active pre-pandemic still haven't returned at the same levels, often due to health or logistical concerns. And social isolation within this group is growing, with 1 in 3 older adults at risk. This compounds healthcare and mental health challenges in this age group as well. And similarly, school-age children are facing more barriers to volunteering, with fewer placements, limited outreach, and age-based restrictions. Nearly a quarter of our youth are feeling regularly lonely. We know that volunteering can be a profound antidote to this isolation. When people volunteer, they build new friendships, they broaden their social horizons, they deepen their ties to community, and these in turn boost their sense of belonging and well-being. Volunteering brings people together and creates the connection that many are lacking in modern life. But even if people want to volunteer and participate more deeply in their communities, they may not know how to get started, or they may experience barriers to participation. All of these trends have contributed to the decline in volunteerism that is threatening community resilience across Canada. So what can we do about it? How can we mitigate volunteer burnout, encourage greater engagement from community members, and start to reverse some of these trends? Well, we know that the number one reason that people volunteer is because they want to contribute to their community in positive ways. It's connected to their values and their desire to help create the kind of community in which they want to work, live, and play. To avoid burnout and encourage more people to get involved, we need to tap into these values. By taking a relational rather than a transactional approach to volunteer recruitment, support, and stewardship, we can better understand people's motivations and engagement preferences. What makes them tick? How do they want to be involved? What do they have in terms of expertise that they can contribute? With the landscape of volunteering rapidly evolving, Canadians today want to engage in community in more flexible and creative ways than in the past. In fact, Canadians are moving away from traditional institutional volunteering towards more informal engagement. We need to understand these trends in order to create volunteer engagement models that are responsive to the changing needs of Canadian volunteers, so that we can retain volunteers, so that we can continue to have a strong formal volunteering network and infrastructure across the country. Many, especially younger generations, may be very active in causes important to them through grassroots initiatives, online campaigns, or mutual aid networks. But they might not label what they're doing as volunteering. They may not conceptualize their activities as being volunteering. This presents both a challenge and an opportunity. How can we adapt to recognize and integrate these new forms of civic participation into our formal organizational programs and structures to support volunteers? Today's volunteers have different expectations than decades ago. One size doesn't fit all. People want volunteering to fit their lives. Traditional volunteer recruitment and management approaches aren't sufficient anymore because volunteers now expect more flexibility in how they contribute. They want clear and ongoing communication, and they want to see that their efforts are making a real impact. They may prefer short-term or project-based opportunities rather than year-long commitments. And they often look for roles that utilize their skills, whether that be in tech or marketing or finance, or that align with their personal passions about which they have considerable knowledge. Also, in the digital age, convenience is key. So opportunities that can be signed up for or performed online tend to attract more interest. Organizations that are able to embrace virtual volunteering, micro-volunteering with small discrete tasks, and other innovative models are finding it easier to engage busy professionals and students. Once we figure out how volunteers want to be engaged, we may find that we have some work to do in breaking down barriers to participation. Not everyone has equal access to volunteer opportunities. Systemic barriers like socioeconomic hurdles, lack of time, or feeling unwelcome due to race, gender, or diverse abilities may keep people from volunteering, even if they want to be more involved. There's a growing call to modernize volunteerism by removing these barriers. That means creating more inclusive and diverse volunteer programs, for example, offering childcare or transit passes for volunteers who need them, simplifying overly strict and cumbersome screening processes that deter willing helpers, and then actively reaching out to underrepresented groups. Many factors cause equity-deserving individuals to abandon volunteering or not engage in the first place. But by embracing newcomers, youth, seniors, and marginalized communities in volunteer roles, we can help revitalize community participation in a way that truly reflects our Canadian diversity. When we recognize this, we can strive to create more welcoming, meaningful volunteer roles for people of all backgrounds. And our sector is increasingly collaborating and innovating. 'Twas ever thus, right? That's what we are always doing, always thinking about how we can better engage, how we can do things differently, how we can be more responsive. And volunteer organizations are sharing best practices and experimenting with new approaches like skills-based volunteering or family or group volunteering opportunities, partnering with businesses or school groups to engage a wider range and more diverse volunteer base. All of these measures are about meeting volunteers where they're at, whether online, at the workplace, or in their own communities, and making it easier for our busy, tech-savvy, and diverse Canadian population to jump in and participate. By modernizing how we engage volunteers, we can spark a new wave of community participation that is resilient and adaptive to our changing times. The bottom line, to stem burnout and revitalize participation, volunteering must be made more accessible, flexible, and rewarding for the volunteer. We need to connect with volunteers on a deeply personal level and maintain that connection across the volunteer life cycle. I want you to take a moment and think about the amount of time, energy, and resources that you're putting into each stage of the volunteer life cycle. How are these resources allocated across those different stages? Are there stages that feel inadequately supported, or stages that feel like no amount of resourcing can help you meet your volunteers' needs? Thinking back to our opening questions, do your reflections on these questions provide any insights into your responses about when your volunteers typically lose engagement? If yes, then that's a good indication of where to start. Let's take a look at each stage and identify some relational strategies that we can employ to deepen engagement. So let's start with recruitment and screening. How can we get really creative about marketing our volunteer opportunities? We want to tap into people's passion by promoting the impact of the role, not necessarily highlighting first and foremost the tasks that are involved or the activities that we want them to engage in. Because even the most mundane task contributes to the overall mission. So let's get people excited about that. Let's promote the change that they're contributing to in the community. And let's think about where we're promoting our volunteer opportunities. Local volunteer centers are an obvious first choice and will help really reach into the community organizations and networks that have that base of volunteers who are interested, engaged, and looking for that next opportunity. They're also doing their own outreach to try and find people who may want to volunteer but not know how to get started. And they often have multiple feeders of networks that can help ripple your opportunities out in ways that we couldn't do it on our own. But where else? Think about sharing your opportunities with other areas in the community that people are gathering and where people are looking for community, looking for that sense of belonging and coming together in community. Think about local faith groups or cultural associations, maybe a local sports team, or partnering with workplaces and schools in the vicinity of your organization. This helps really expand our networks and get that message out into audiences where we might not typically be sharing our opportunities. And rather than recruiting one volunteer at a time, consider recruiting a group of volunteers. Young people, we know, often want to volunteer with friends. So if we can create opportunities for a group of youth to come and do something for the organization, that might actually increase our ability to both recruit and retain young people in support of our organizations. And young professionals may want to be involved, may want to contribute and give back and be involved in their communities, but they might not be able to make that long-term commitment on their own. However, we're seeing a lot of interest from young professionals in volunteering as part of a group, where they might make a commitment to come every Wednesday to support your organization, but they're going to do it as a group and they're going to take turns. So it might not be the same person coming every month, but a group of them will make a commitment that somebody will be there on a regular basis for a longer term commitment. And by getting creative about how we structure our recruitment and engagement opportunities, we can start to tap into the new behaviors and the new expectations of volunteers. And we also have to be thoughtful about the language that we're using. If we want to reach new audiences, we have to avoid jargon and idioms and colloquialisms and ensure that the language we're using is really inclusive and accessible for people from diverse walks of life. Let's switch over to screening for a minute. Think about your own screening processes. Are they overly cumbersome, intimidating, time-consuming? Is there any way that you can streamline them? Do you still take a one-size-fits-all approach? Or are you aligning your screening requirements to the needs of specific rules? Being mindful of your duty of care, this is absolutely important. Some opportunities absolutely require rigorous screening processes, and I'm not in any way suggesting that we don't do our due diligence. But where we can, is there a way to make these easier? Consider what's really necessary and try to shorten the time between somebody expressing an interest in your organization and their first volunteer activity. Let's talk about training and onboarding now. Take a look in your mind at your training and onboarding materials and delivery mechanisms that you use. Do you get excited about inviting volunteers to participate in them? Or do you dread the glazed over eyes, nodding heads, and the less than subtle multitasking while you're trying to engage them? Are you offering a blend of synchronous and asynchronous training, or even in-person opportunities? Think about your training. Think about, is it responsive and relevant in today's climate? Is it tech savvy? Is it accessible? And then think about ways in which you could adapt it to make it more relevant for today's society. One thing that we're hearing a lot about is gamification. Can you gamify aspects of your training and onboarding processes to make them more engaging? Consider implementing a point system to a reward system, so that when people complete tasks, quizzes, or achieve particular milestones, they receive something that helps motivate and activate their participation. Add a sense of adventure and progression by creating quests or challenges. Use simulations or role-playing that mimic real-world scenarios that allow volunteers to practice skills in a safe and supportive environment. And integrate storytelling elements to make the training more relatable and draw volunteers into the work that you're doing. Tap into the collective by developing collaborative tasks to build teamwork and foster social interaction. And at every step, integrate positive feedback. Instant feedback helps volunteers integrate learnings in real time and helps them stay more engaged. And now, the moment when it all comes together, scheduling and engagement. Here's where things can get complicated. It's all well and good to be relational during recruitment and training, but now projects need to be managed, services delivered, and metrics met. You need to match your available volunteers with opportunities that match their skills, interests, and availability, and ensure that they have a clear understanding of their duties, expectations, and the impact of their work. This is no small task. So we need to maintain open and ongoing communication with volunteers to help address concerns, provide feedback, and ensure that volunteers feel valued and heard. And this is really reflective of what we saw during our Kahoot, right? This is the stage where we're losing people, and that ongoing communication and connection is key to retention. So how can we foster a supportive environment? Ensure that our volunteers have ongoing access to training and resources, and that instant feedback once they begin volunteering. Consider implementing a volunteer mentor or buddy system so that volunteers in similar roles can support each other. And don't be afraid to pull your volunteers into the volunteer management process. Can some of your volunteers help manage other volunteers? This all of a sudden starts to expand your capacity. And remember, when I said that organizations with a dedicated volunteer management team retain 16 times more volunteers than those who don't, your volunteers can help with that, but so can your administration. Does the senior leadership of your organization really understand and value the importance of volunteers? If not, talk to them about the importance of volunteer engagement and the strategic role it can play in your organization. This brings us to recognition and stewardship. Don't forget about your volunteers during the downtimes. Ongoing stewardship is key to retention. Think about how you steward your donors. Do you put the same thought, care, and resources into stewarding your volunteers? If not, we should. Acknowledging and appreciating volunteers' contributions through various means, whether they be certificates of appreciation, public recognition, awards, or thank you events, can foster a sense of value and encourage continued engagement. But public displays don't appeal to everyone. Regularly soliciting feedback from volunteers and using it to improve your volunteer program can ensure it remains relevant and effective. And it can also be a really effective recognition activity. Not everyone wants an award. Some volunteers may actually feel more recognized by having their voices and opinions valued as part of your evaluation and improvement efforts. Again, it goes back to building genuine relationships with your volunteers, getting to know what motivates them, what makes them feel valued. Think about how you might adapt your programming to be more responsive to volunteer needs, shifting volunteer behaviors and any barriers that might be in their way. And involving volunteers in the process is a great way to get to know them better and deepen engagement. Powerful wave or quiet ripple. Volunteering has a profound ability to move Canadians together towards collective resilience. And to harness this power, we need to create accessible, supportive, and inclusive pathways to participation that everyone can be a part of. Hopefully, I've shared some ideas today that are percolating in your mind and might soon find their way into your own volunteer programs. Thank you for all that you do to support your volunteers and help facilitate their collective impact. Together, we create ripples of change. Thank you. Oh, but wait, we're not done yet. Earlier, you met Ester Forcolin with the Red Cross in Amsterdam, and I'm so pleased that she will join me now to share some additional insights from her work in the Netherlands.
Thank you.
Hi, Esther. Great to see you again.
Hi, Heather.
Thank you so much for agreeing to participate in our session today. It's great to have ideas from people that are actually working on implementing new and creative, opportunities for people to be involved and contribute in their communities. I just wanted to start by maybe posing a couple of questions to you, if that makes sense.
Sure, go ahead.
Wonderful. Esther, as you've heard, in Canada, we're seeing a significant shift in the ways that people want to be engaged, volunteer, and participate. And at the same time, we're seeing all of these increases in demands for services at organizations, and we're really struggling to meet and match up this supply and demand issue that we're having. And I'm curious whether you're seeing similar trends in the Netherlands and how that volunteer landscape is shifting in your communities.
I must say I do recognize a lot of what you're telling us now, also in your previous webinar. Because what I can see from my 16 years of being a volunteer, I see that generations of volunteers who dedicate every possible minute in just one organization for decades and decades is decreasing. We don't find them much anymore. We have a few here, but it's not that common anymore. What I can see is that the average volunteer has a full life with several challenges, obligations, precious time to choose what to do with that. And so they're getting also a bit more critical. What's in it for me? How do I want that extra time to be spent? Realizing also that in Canada, you have probably less free time than in the Netherlands, because I understand a lot of employed people in Canada have like 2 weeks of vacation in total for a whole year. You're getting very careful with the free time you do have. So, that probably makes it even more challenging in your country. So I do recognize it that, the landscape is changing.
Yeah, it's interesting. You make a good point around that, when people share their time, whether it's, during their vacation time or, as they're trying to, do caring for their families in the evenings and weekends and things like that. And we're actually seeing more organizations, more corporate organizations providing opportunities for individuals to volunteer on work time, whether those be actual, sort of employer driven volunteer activities, or whether that's, you get it, for example, where I work, we can take a half day a month, personal leave to volunteer. And, it's interesting because in Canada, about 30% of people say that they get their first entree, their first introduction to volunteering through their workplace. So, but it's an interesting point that you make there about volunteers and vacation, and how we can create spaces as part of our daily lives, even potentially our work lives, to participate and engage. What innovations are you seeing organizations in the Netherlands employ to respond to these shifts in the landscape?
Well, we do have what they call classic volunteer who signed up for one of our programs and is dedicated to that for a certain time of their lives. But some volunteers, they say, like, I don't want to be connected that close net to the Red Cross, but if in an incident you need my help, just call me. And we have this network, it's called Ready to Help, and it's a network of people just like you and me who are willing to help others when needed, whether it concerns in flooding, a traffic jam, or just help with refugees. And at Ready to Help, you don't need any extra training, you don't need to commit you to anything. You're in our network, and if needed, you can call them. You can you send a message out. And when Corona hit, at that moment, we had about 40,000 volunteers within that network. And we were also everybody was told, stay home, keep your distance, be careful, basically say, don't do anything. But volunteers people wanted to help. They wanted to make some kind of difference. They want to address to their need of fulfillment and make a contribution in your personal life, but also for people around you. And our network increased twice of double in just a matter of weeks, where we went from 40,000 to 80,000 people that sign up and say, I want to help somehow. I don't mind what. It can be handing out water or, putting up beds in a shelter for homeless people. And they did. And we had a sports facility where we had to create an extra shelter for homeless people. And in the neighborhood, people just arrived and said, we want to help. Just let us help. So the willingness is there.
That's it. That's incredible. That jump When you said doubled, I was, maybe 200 to 400, but no, 40,000 to 80,000. That's quite a magnitude of volunteers. That is incredible. So Esther, I'm interested, like, have you adapted your screening process then for those volunteers that are wanting to do that? Just call on me and I'll come and do something when you need it.
Yeah, I mean, we do focus, I think, in our screening, not always on the activity itself. We have several programs, whether it can be in an emergency situation or giving workshop, other trainings to other people. But if you just advertise for there's this exciting activity that you can do, you only trigger them for that particular activity. And within the Red Cross, we have a mission. And if we can advertise or screen people based on, can you relate to our mission of helping people? Then you probably get a volunteer that will stay with the organization for much longer, even if your job might change over time or some programs, because we're fluctuating with the Red Cross. We need to adapt to the need at that moment. So it could be that at some points a certain program it's not so relevant anymore. It's not needed, and something else is more needed. And then you might lose your volunteer because they signed up for this particular activity. But if they say, I just want to be connected with this organization, then they can easily change, and also change careers within your volunteer work. Because, at some point, like you said, you can get volunteers in, but how do you keep them? How do you keep them engaged and motivated? And sometimes it can be good that when their personal situations change, maybe this job is not for them, but maybe there's something else that might trigger them and give them new inspiration.
Yeah, I love that connecting to the mission and tapping into people's values and passion, and also that idea of mobility or fluidity around how you engage. I think that is so important for us as we think as well about succession planning for our volunteers, is how do we help people move through different volunteer opportunities within our organization, whether that's because we're adapting programs to be responsive to a new kind of climate, or whether that be us adapting to their shifting needs and their shifting availability or capacity to engage. So yeah. Thank you. That's wonderful. And I'm curious, for the program where you talk about, people could just be called up to come and help where it's needed. Are you finding that there are particular characteristics of people who prefer that type of volunteering to a more traditional ongoing volunteer opportunity? So, for example, do you see more younger generations or middle-aged sandwich generation or older adults who want to sort of ease back after a lifetime of volunteering, or more first-time volunteers? Are you seeing any particular trends in that program of the type of volunteer who's coming to participate with you?
Well, I didn't do any professional research about it, so I have to share with you my personal experience. But it's not always a generational difference. It's a matter of a character and what triggers you more, what interests you more. I mean, some volunteers might be young students that spend hours and hours with the Red Cross, and over time they say, I started my career, I just don't have time. I started a family, I have less time. Mm-hmm. Or the person who has had a decade of a career and said, I'm gonna retire, and doesn't mean they're pulling back. Sometimes they're gonna work even more after. And this way we have one of our volunteers. He started at our events of first aid and emergency crisis and everything. Now he's a driver. He's 86 years old. He's working for us for over 40 years. But his job obviously has changed. So, but there are also volunteers that say, I've done my job for a few years. I'm going to move to something else. Everything can happen.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Esther. I really appreciate you sharing these insights with us. And I just want to make sure I just caught sight of the time, and we're almost at the end of our time together today. But we do have one question in the Q&A, and I want to make sure that we get to that question before we sign off. And so questions for Jeff: how do priorities of the volunteer management change between an organization with staff versus one that is all volunteers? That is an excellent question, Jeff, and a challenging one. As you know, as I mentioned, we have almost 60% of the charitable organizations in Canada operate without any staff, and so this puts a lot more pressure on volunteers, obviously. But it also, I think, changes the volunteer roles that you need to have. So you need to have volunteers in positions of leadership. There's no sort of getting away from that. In a structured organization, you could have staff that are supporting. You can have people who might be dedicated to various different business units. We need to sort of mimic that in our volunteer roles for organizations that don't have staff. So how are you recruiting and supporting as a board your volunteers to fulfill functions like finance or IT, keeping your website up to date, as well as all of those sort of more person-to-person elements of care that you need to be doing. And I think this is a real challenge. I think, you do need to prioritize some of the less exciting aspects of the work, right? You still need that infrastructure. You still need that capacity to be able to deliver your services. And so some of the volunteers that you bring in need to be providing that bench strength, providing that support to other volunteers who then are able to kind of go out and do that more face-to-face, more frontline service work. And so you end up having a volunteer-supported volunteer model. And so from a prioritization perspective, I think your board members in those organizations have to be incredibly strong, incredibly dedicated, and incredibly organized. Esther, do you have any other thoughts on that question for the audience that's gathered with us today?
No, I'm just what you said about having an employed staff and volunteers. Within the Red Cross, we have to have a few people that are unpaid staff to continue to support our volunteers. But the volunteers are the backbone of our organization. If we don't have volunteers, we might as well not exist. So it's for me, it's as simple as that. I am now staffed as well as volunteer, but basically my staff position is to be of support of the volunteers. And that's what I always try to keep in mind, like I'm there for them and myself being a volunteer. So, and that's what I always try to stay focused on. And that's the drive to do what I do.
Thank you, Esther. I think that's a beautiful sentiment to end on. And thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Lynn.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you again for such a wonderful presentation. You inspire us all again to really recognize our volunteers and think about how important they are in our organizations. Thank you, Esther, for joining us. It's great to have a bit of an international perspective on volunteerism. And I know that your organization is so critical around the world in dealing with all of the many crises that we face, on an ongoing basis. And, the volunteers in your organization are doing such important, such critical work. And I think we need to keep that in perspective when our organizations are asking volunteers, as we do in Ontario, to come into a gaming center and volunteer for a couple of hours. To to meet with customers and raise money for their organizations. Those are pretty easy volunteer positions in respect to an organization like the Red Cross, where people are out in potentially dangerous situations. So thank you for bringing that perspective in. And Judith, you and the Canadian Postcode Lottery Foundation, again, thank you so much for partnering with us for these webinars. They've been great, and we look forward to continuing to do that over the next year or so, for sure. And again, thank you to everyone for participating. Please remember, it is Volunteer Week, and recognize your volunteers on an ongoing basis, not just this week. So thanks to everyone, and have a great day.